And I am now thrilled to welcome you to our discussion of the other side of the hill. And let's start with a few Braver Angels ground rules. First, we're here to understand others and explain our views, not to convince anyone to change their mind. Also, we will take turns, not interrupt others, listen to everyone, open up space for quieter group members, and be respectful, as in no eye rolling or loud sighs when someone is speaking. In other words, we bring our best selves to this discussion. Here's what we'll be doing tonight. We're going to start off with our two facilitators. I'll introduce them in a moment, and they're going to ask a few questions of our special guests, two people who have appeared in the movie. So there'll be a short Q&A on the part of our facilitators. And after that, you, the audience, will be invited to ask questions of our special guests, right? And then after that, we'll be doing a Q&A for the entire audience. So you'll get to answer a few questions. You'll be doing that in breakout rooms first, and then in the main room also after that. Now, our Zoom event manager tonight is Janet Sedgley from the great state of Montana. She's reminding us that at the moment she's living in Oregon. She has homes in two places. So she's joining us from Oregon. Janet, please place your email address and phone number in the chat in case anyone needs to get hold of you with technical questions. Beth Mallow and Jeff Spitzer are our two facilitators, and I'm pleased to introduce them now. Jeff Spitzer moved to Oregon from California nearly 25 years ago. So like more than half of the people from Oregon, he is a transplant to the state. With all the political unrest in recent years, Jeff sought out Braver Angels in early 2020 and soon found himself in the role of state coordinator. Jeff spends his non-Braver Angels time working in market research and is also a certified health coach. Father to many, husband to one, Jeff is honored to be helping to run tonight's event. Now, Beth Mallow co-chairs the Braver Angels Action Team in a larger climate change organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, and is also a trained Braver Angels moderator. In her day job, she is a physician and researcher in Nashville, Tennessee. She also co-leads a local civic discourse group, Common Ground Nashville, and finds hope in, that can't be right. You're not, are you in Nashville? You are. Okay, Common Ground Nashville, and finds hope in helping people communicate to bridge political divides. Now over to you, Jeff and Beth.
Thank you so much, Donna. And we are just so happy tonight to have Jim and Nick with us. For those of you who watched the film, they were featured and have wonderful stories to tell. And as Donna mentioned, we're going to go ahead and let you ask some questions. But while you're thinking of your questions, we're going to go ahead, myself and then Jeff, and ask a first question for each of us, of Jim and Nick. And then while we're speaking, please go ahead and start thinking about your questions. You can start raising your hands. And if you need to remember how to raise your hands, if you've got the most recent edition of Zoom, it's really simple because it'll just say raise hand in the bottom. If you have an older version, it'll be under reactions, raise hand. And if you need help, you can reach out to Janet, who's got the help label next to her name. But I'm going to go ahead and actually, Jeff, I want to let you introduce our guests first, and then we'll go ahead with the questions.
So excited to jump right into the questions, but since we are fortunate enough to have Jim and Nick with us tonight, let's introduce them to the audience. First, Jim Walls. Jim is the past and founding director of the Lake County Resources Initiative. Born and raised in Oregon, Jim worked for the NRCS in the Midwest, supporting farmers with soil and crop health before moving back to Lake County to start LCRI. Although retired, Jim is still actively involved with LCRI's work and is the chairman of the LCRI Board of Directors. And Nick Johnson. Nick is the current executive director of LCRI. Born and raised in Eastern Oregon, Nick joined LCRI 4 years ago through the Rare AmeriCorps program. Following Jim's retirement, Nick moved into the executive director position and has remained there ever since. Nick's goal with the organization is to continue building on all the great work that Jim and others have done. Please help us welcome Jim and Nick. Donna, back to you for the first question.
Actually,
not Donna.
I'll
Yeah.
ask the first
How about that?
question. Yeah, no problem. So either Jim or Nick or both of you feel free to answer. For those of the folks in the audience who weren't able to watch the film tonight that we featured, that we're gonna talk about in detail, I thought you might be able to give us a little bit of the background about yourselves, how the issues in the film became important to you, and the relevance of your work to rural communities. So either Jim or Nick or each of you, we'd love to hear about that, the background about yourselves, the issues in the film, and the relevance to rural communities.
Well, I'll start out. I was in the Midwest doing soil conservation work, and then went through a program through USDA called Resource Conservation Development in Western Washington. And we got into the midst of the spotted owl situation, and became friends with Martin Goebel from Sustainable Northwest. And he says, would you like to go back to Lakeview after they just lost 5 to 6 mills and help negotiate some agreements between industry and environmental groups? And I said, I'd love that challenge. And so I went back to do that. And it was that working on forestry issues that got us into renewable energy, actually got us into looking at biomass heavily. And so anyway, that's my background. And I think what Donna outlined as rules for you guys is listening to people is the exact same rules that we use for facilitating between industry and environmental groups.
Awesome. Yeah, and hey everybody, my name is Nick Johnson, and I am from Eastern Oregon originally. I was born here. I've lived here my whole life, and I know that creates a bit of bias, but I truly love Eastern Oregon, the landscape here, the people here, and I love the communities that exist here. And you know, even in my lifetime, I've seen changes in the natural environment, and I've seen the difficulties that rural communities in Eastern Oregon face. And when LCRI offered me the opportunity to address both of those things from a sustainability standpoint, it was something that I was very passionate about and excited about. And it was really like finding my calling and the first opportunity I had in my life to fully commit and fully give myself to an effort. So that's how I guess the short story of how I ended up here. It took a lot of trial and error to get here, but I'm thankful and fortunate to be in the position that I am today and love what.
Thank you so much, guys. And Jeff, would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah, one thing I would really love to learn is what your biggest challenge was when trying to get the community to buy into the idea of renewable energy.
I'll start out there, and I don't think it was that big of a challenge. As I said, we were working on forest issues, and we had the east side screens, so you could not cut any trees larger than 21 inches. So it meant we were moving to smaller diameter and removing fuel loads from forests so that fires wouldn't get out of control. So we're going smaller diameter, and it started us thinking, well, what are we going to use all that small diameter? Now, you can't use biomass off federal forests, but we started down those roads to look at a biomass plant to come in. And then we had this geothermal. You've seen in the trailer, you've seen that geyser going off. We got a lot of geothermal. So our first thought was, wait a minute, we got biomass, we got geothermal, we've got a sun resource because we have a radar site, an ex-military radar site that was used to detect missiles coming in from Russia if that ever happened. So we had all this infrastructure that just said, whoa, we ought to be utilizing that as an economic development driver. You know, we've lost 5 mills. Let's go this route. And then we decided, well, if we're going that far, why don't we study and see if we can do a plan for climate change mitigation, see where we can get this using the economic tools that we have to see how far we could go.
And fortunately for me, Jim did a lot of that really hard work. He talked, doesn't acknowledge that there were probably some tough conversations that were had, but Jim and the folks that came before me really did a fantastic job of setting me up for success and continuing on these conversations. But I will say the one, I guess, hurdle that I've noticed, and whereas Jim, his focus was really utility scale solar development here in Lake County, and that's something that we're still heavily involved with. I've started to expand the program areas within LCRI that focus on small projects that benefit individual business owners and individual community members. But one of the hurdles that I guess I've encountered is learning how to speak about the benefits from renewable energy on the audience's terms. Everybody seems to be interested in a little bit, in different parts of the benefits of renewable energy and sustainability systems. So getting to know your audience and speaking about it in a way that they, resonates with them has been something that's been a bit of a challenge.
Thank you so much. We're going to take some audience questions now. And remember, you can raise your hand at the bottom or go to reactions. And I see that Len Breslow has your hand up. And then I also see Dwayne Wilder. So why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, Len, and ask your question.
Okay. Bravery Angels, we are concerned about divides in this country and bringing people together and overcoming the divides, and a lot in the film seems to have really talked about over the divides having been overcome and moving on, which is great. But I kind of, given what's going on, was shown in Portland with the Republicans leaving the state, to thwart a bill. I guess those Republicans were elected by somebody, and somewhere in the film you mentioned that, your Eastern Oregon county, I forget its name, is with the W, is Republican. So, I guess I would just like to know more about the conflicts that occurred to get to that point, to start this project, and how they were overcome.
Yeah. So I guess I can speak to that a bit, and then Jim, I'll pass it over to you. But Oregon is a unique place in that sense because, the urban-rural divide exists here, and the urban majority politically controls the state. And I think another factor in that is the Cascade Mountains themselves. Geographically, Eastern and Western Oregon are completely different places. So that creates a lot of misunderstanding in the first place, just that difference in geology, difference in landscape. But growing up in Eastern Oregon, it was common to hear that folks in rural parts of the state didn't feel like their voices were being heard when it came to policy development, and some of those negative impacts that may be felt in rural communities. Those concerns weren't being heard on a state policy level. And, maybe at first when you think about climate change and sustainability as an opportunity to build bridges between urban and rural divides, it probably doesn't seem like the best choice. But at the same time, it does offer great opportunity because climate change affects all of us. And, I don't think I've ever met anybody who didn't want to see a healthy landscape or a healthy forest. And, everybody loves to interact with the natural world in one way or another. But I think that love and that desire to see healthy lands, healthy communities, and healthy economies is pretty universal across the board.
I think also the people realize here, while we have disagreements, and I have people that say, hey, I don't believe in climate change. And I respect that opinion. I talk it out, but I don't get mad and try and convince them. I just like to chat. And I think that helps a lot with people. But also, when you ask them about things, Goose Lake went dry this year. That's first year since 1934. And if we have another year like that, there's going to be some cattle operations that could go out of business. We can't, these droughts and the fires, we burned over 500,000 acres, I think it is, in Lake County this past summer. All those things people recognize are changes. And we talk about those changes and, you know, how we can solve those changes. And I think that talking and listening is what makes things work rather than trying to convince, you know, you idiots, you don't understand what I'm telling you. You know, that doesn't go over too well. You'll probably get punched by a cowboy for that one.
I think we have another hand up. Peter Chastain.
You forgot
Yes.
Dwayne.
This,
Let's go on. Actually, yeah, go ahead. Let's go on, Peter. We'll come back to you. Since let's go in order. I see Truth Johnson next. Truth Johnston, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, I would actually like to know what all is going on in Eastern Oregon. Like, how do people use the land? You know, and how is that the economics going on there? Because as I see some of these solar things and the wind things going on, but is that really what people want to be doing when they're out in the rural areas, having a big farm like that?
Yeah, you know, in Eastern Oregon, it's really natural resource driven economies, you know, ranching, farming, timber. Those are really probably the three main industries. I mean, of course, you have government and the school system, but really historically and traditionally and still today, those natural resource based economies really drive what's going on out here. And why there's been, I think, you know, or part of the reason why there's been a broad acceptance of renewable energy development in rural communities is because oftentimes it can coexist with ongoing operations and offers opportunity to those folks that are living off the land, I guess, to develop additional income streams to increase, you know, and support their existing way of life, you know, and no doubt there is conflicts, you know, things like land use, and with recent policy developments in Oregon, those conflicts around land use and project siting are going to become more and more relevant over time. You know, and I don't know, not to go off on a tangent here, but approaching that from a point, you know, on a community level and understanding what communities' values are, and trying to maintain those, you know, as we're seeing this bigger push for renewable energy development, I think is an important way to go about it.
And I think also you got to understand Eastern Oregon a little bit, Lake County particularly, and I think we're typical of many. We're less than one person per square mile. That's classified not just as rural, but frontier. It's still under a frontier classification. And 75% of the land out here is owned by the government. So it's not going to have solar. It's not.
If people can mute themselves when they're not speaking, that would be great. Thank you.
Looks like you muted yourself a little bit, Jim, on accident there.
Okay, what I was saying was Lake County, like much of Eastern Oregon, are vast. We have less than one person per square mile, and that makes us not just rural, but classified as frontier under rural development. And 75% of our land mass is federally owned. So it's not going to have solar, it's not going to have wind, you know, those type of things. So those are the limits that we're put under when we're working with these things. So you won't see lots of acres with this solar on it or something. We don't have any wind in Lake County. We get too much wind when we get it for turbines.
Janet, can we mute all? And then we'll just make sure Jim and Nick and Jeff and I unmute just to keep the background noise down. So we're going to mute all. And then as you are asked to speak, you can unmute. That way we can keep the noise down. Thank you.
Here it goes.
All right, Dwayne's got a burning question. Dwayne, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Lynn all but hijacked my question with the first one, but I'd like to follow up by asking if there were any ideologues who were kind of stuck in the mud, and whether if there were, you tried to incorporate them somehow, or just kind of did an end run around them, and worked with the people who really wanted to work with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I guess as an organization, I feel like that does what we do. I feel like it's our responsibility to do our best to try to understand what people's concerns are. In every situation, we're not ever going to be in a position where we just ignore folks, I guess. If people have concerns, we want to bring those to the community, to the decision makers, to the developers, and have frank discussions about that, and developers that are good community partners are going to be willing to be flexible and work with the community, and try to mitigate the impacts, or address those concerns. So that's a really good question. I also just wanted to flag before I pass it back over to Jim that Peter did throw his question in the chat. It looked like he had a bad connection, so I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
And I think, like any place in the United States, we're going to have people that are sticks in the mud. I mean, and you deal directly with it and respect their opinions. And I think showing respect and stuff gets people to listen easier than if they're trying to fight what you're trying to get across, I don't know if I explained that well, but that's my general philosophy of it. That's going to happen no matter where we are, rural or urban.
Thank you, Jim and Nick. And let me read Peter's question. It's in the chat. He wanted to ask both Nick and Jim for an analysis of the recent denial 2-1 of the Blue Marmot solar project. What are the issues in your opinions? And it was apparently a denial by county commissioners. So maybe you can just provide us with some background when you answer that question for those of us who are not familiar with the Blue Marmot project.
Yeah. So the Blue Marmot project was a utility scale solar array. It was, I don't know exactly how many megawatts in size. I want to say it was like between 30 and 50. I can't remember off the top of my head here. But it was an outside company. It's an international company, or a subsidiary of an international company that was interested in developing a project in Lake County. And originally, when they were trying to come into the county, they were trying to site this project on irrigated ag land. And as an organization, LCRI, we oppose that for a lot of different reasons. Ag is a big economic driver around here. Just the value of high producing soils and water, and water rights impacts to adjacent landowners. And you can talk about the conflict with siting on irrigated ag land forever. But they did that, and they didn't make an active effort to work with the community in that situation. So they had put these agreements and this efforts into motion 2 years before they even had open conversations with the community. So when the community found out about this on a broader scale, they openly voiced their opposition to it being sited on irrigated ag land. And then, the developer just kind of got off on the wrong foot with the community. They sent one of their subcontracting agencies out to the community to conduct surveys, and they were trespassing across farmers' land, across ranchers' land, without permission. And if any of you are in rural communities, that's a no-no. So that caused a bit of contention. So they just kind of got off on the wrong foot in that sense. But there's a lot of reasons why the commissioners denied the conditional use permit for that project. I don't envy the position that they were in. And I think the conflict kind of maybe from their perspective was representing their community and their community needs and wants, versus maybe viewing it more objectively from a legal lens. But ultimately, there were steps that company could have taken to address community concerns in different ways that may have gained that rapport or that support from the community for the project. Jim is on the planning commission, so he was directly involved in that decision-making process as well.
Yeah, and that was a tough decision. I was upset at him, And not being a community member, because many of the solar projects come along have been excellent community members and get involved in community. But I felt they met the law, and I thought the commissioners would be the place to discuss the community benefits. We didn't have that latitude at the Planning Commission. So it was voted 3-2 in favor. But I voted in favor for that reason only, was I thought the commissioners ought to be the ones that handle this and handle those issues that are community related.
And on the other side of that, it did come back to the land use issue. Why Lake County is such a great destination for these utility scale projects is because we have a great solar resource. It's sunny here for a lot of days out of the year, but beyond that, we just have a lot of, what's essentially called alkaline sage ground. It's extremely low value land. It is non-productive soil. It doesn't host wildlife. These are the kind of locations where we like to see these projects built, because you're avoiding this conflict, taking grazing land out of commission, taking irrigated ag land out of commission, taking high value land out of commission. And it just, this developer seemed pretty interested and stuck on putting this project in a specific place, and everybody, it seemed like, at least from what I observed, was kind of asking why. And again, I think it goes back to not necessarily aligning with the community values, and I think that the community made that pretty well known.
Thank you both. Lindy, you're up next. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. We're 6th generation ranchers in Southeast Wyoming. And thank you, Nick, for your last explanation. And I really appreciated the work on transparency with all the partners involved, and the communication that all that takes is really important. And you guys were spot on. We kind of have we have a lot of wind in Wyoming, and yet there's some issues about, some people are really concerned about our viewscapes, and how the wind generators themselves are becoming really big, and kind of, for some people it's a boom if it's on your land. That's great, but the other issue is also then the recycling of some of the aspects of the equipment for both solar and wind. The big things that I'm wondering, did you do work with your landfill people, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, so as far as recycling, well, I guess I got to preface this by saying, so Lake County specifically is a solar county. We don't have a ton of wind here. There's wind in a lot of other places around Oregon, but that's not our expertise. And I know that there's a whole set of issues and dynamics around wind specifically. But as far as solar goes, and like the longevity of these projects and what happens when these projects have run their course 30, 40 years or whatever, that's a question that we've really been trying to ask and push a lot, because nobody has a good answer for it right now. We talk about recycling solar panels. That's not something that's really economically feasible at this point. So there's going to have to be something, some sort of subsidy probably contributed to that when we, 30 years from now, when we have all these utility scale solar sites being pulled out of commission. So I appreciate you bringing it up, because it is a really important issue. And I guess the way we've talked about it, or the way we approach that, is conversations again with the developer, because ultimately it's their responsibility to remediate these sites and take care of those panels that are there. So it's asking questions like, how can you ensure that your company is still going to exist in 30 years to fulfill this responsibility? Or what does your bonding look like? Or what are the costs around that kind of stuff? But, around recycling and site remediation specifically, that's really something that we talk about with the developer. And even above and beyond that, remediation to the land specifically. So it's a very hot topic right now, and I think that there's a lot of focus on trying to figure out what exactly that's going to look like. And I don't have a great answer for that issue.
I know, I'd like to add to that. I agree with that. I wish we were brilliant enough to think of everything in the beginning when we start some of these things. Now we have a solar committee, not just looking at ag land, but looking at what other soil irrigated ag land, but looking at good soil types and doing further restrictions in areas. And I think these are some of the questions that we're learning now as we've gotten more, that what we need to deal with and find answers for. And some of that's going to come along. I'm a believer in that the human species is a great one for solving problems when we put our minds to it.
That's for sure. Thanks, Jim. Kathy Daniel, you're next. Can you unmute and ask your question?
Thanks, Beth. We were watching the film last night, and it reminded me of a trip we took a couple summers ago in South Dakota and North Dakota. And we were in a restaurant, and a guy came in. He pulled up with a truck with a large wind turbine on it, and I was all excited. And I said, "Wow, that's so cool! Where are you taking that turbine?" He said, "Oh, they're awful. This is an Obama administration thing. They've just paid for these. None of us want them. They all just burn up." And he said, "Look in the sky. You'll just see black smoke everywhere." And I thought, oh. I was so excited, and I got the impression, but it's kind of like Jim said, you're not going to make everybody happy. And so I like I wish I had better, braver angels techniques that I could have used on him, but I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. So I don't know that that'll ever happen to me again, but I'd love to have something to say. And then the other thing that occurred to me when I think it was Jim said the price of those turbines, and I was like, but then there was the tax base and the money that came back, but it was very small compared to the price of the turbines. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe that's the Obama thing. Maybe it was. So did my question is, did the federal government pay for the hardware, and then the county keeps the resources, which sounds like a really good deal?
So I'm not aware, I guess, of this issue specifically. I don't know of any projects off the top of my head, at least in Oregon, that either the state or federal government has paid for outright. The federal government offers a lot of subsidies for the adoption of renewable energy projects. We had the federal extension to the investment tax credit. That's 26%. That's huge. And that's really another thing that's really driving this industry, both at a utility scale and a small scale. You have other federal incentives like accelerated depreciation that makes it a really attractive business opportunity for folks that have the capital to invest millions upon millions of dollars in turbines and stuff like that. So, as far as I know, I've never heard of a project that the government's paid for out of pocket. But there's certainly like a lot of federal tax subsidy that is driving the renewable development and the renewable energy industry right now.
And
So
I'll add to that, we did a program with Republican N, a group of Republicans that are favorable to renewable energy and dealing with climate change. And I can't remember the congressman's last name, former congressman. He talked about our senators, our legislators walking out on the cap and trade bill. And I said, a good thing, they were pushing that on us. We have some other answers. He says, Jim, you got to understand it just leaves even the playing field. He says, as a congressman, I know the subsidies we give gas and oil. And all it would have done was even the playing field for everybody. So, we sometimes don't know the whole political realms behind everything, but, both sides are sometimes getting something somewhere. And, and we got to always research that hard before we get an opinion in our head, because it could be, wrong. Yeah.
Yep. Good one. Thank you.
Thank you all. And by the way, Kathy, I know where you can go to gain some of those skills for having those difficult conversations. Barbara, you're next. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I have relatives in Portland, Oregon, who worked with developing small communities and it's kind of tangled with the environmentalists in the tree area. You know, what you could do with trees and developments, and develop and have a kind of bad relationship with me, actually, because I used to try to protect forests there. What I wonder, my question is, do they know, is the word getting out to other parts of Oregon about how well you're doing with developing, you know, with this video and all the good things that are coming out of it?
I would say most certainly yes. On a state level and a national scale, we've been involved in a lot of film screenings and panels, you know, with groups just like this all across the nation. And I get particularly excited about those opportunities to do that in Oregon with urban communities and folks that we just haven't worked with before, because a lot of these issues come down to just like misunderstanding. And as a side note, the other half of of what LCRI does is forestry related work. We facilitate a forest collaborative. We provide biophysical monitoring services. And I guess, you know, we try to squash some of those misunderstandings that like any active management is bad. You know, when you remove fire from a landscape that we live in, you know, particularly just about anywhere in the Intermountain West, it has severe ecological impacts. And to make up for that, you need to have active management. And there's ways that healthy ecologies and healthy economies can coexist. And that's what we drive, I guess, in all of our program areas, not just energy, but forestry, but economic development, you know, the triple bottom line approach.
Yeah, and the purpose of the film, the producers, was to bring the West Side to have an understanding of the East Side and then back and forth. And it's accomplished that goal. I can't tell you how many boards we've been asked to be on and talk with West Side communities. It's been a tremendous amount of good conversation going on over it. The film really accomplished its goal.
I will say that it, you know, one of the things that I'm the most excited about, even though this space is not one that I'm particularly effective in, is being at those conversations and policy development that are being primarily led by urban Oregonians, you know, bringing rural folks into those conversations. So, you know, we have our perspectives and concerns heard has been something that's really, you know, it's been really meaningful to be involved in those conversations and say, you know, from a rural community perspective, this looks a little bit different than it does to you, you know, in an urban community.
Great, thank you so much. Len, we're going to skip you just so we can get to some folks who haven't asked questions yet. Sulani, are you able to, your video's off, are you able to unmute? If not, we'll come back to you, or you can put your question in the chat and we'll go on to Elise Keith.
Oh, I found the unmute button.
Oh, okay, great. Super. Go ahead, Sulani.
I'll leave the video off because I pulled over to the side of the road. So a comment and a question. The comment is that in Eastern Washington, I'm really interested that your county commissioners were able to push back on behalf of the community, because in Eastern Washington, what happened is the state said they took the decision making out of the hands of the local commissioners and put it at the state level. So a lot of those energy projects have increased the urban-rural divide because the rural communities have been shut out of the decision making. A question from what I saw in the video is, have you considered or did you consider and discard the incorporating regenerative grazing practices and a regenerative approach to soil development which is done by some companies doing industrial scale solar? Regenerative energy is one that does. Did you look at incorporating that as a way of addressing that need for keeping agricultural land in agricultural production?
Yeah, so that conversation around dual use of land is something that, you know, is gaining a lot of traction. It's been talked about a lot in the last couple of years. And there are a couple of reasons like why that isn't something that we've really you know, that really hasn't been able to happen here, at least in Eastern Oregon. One of those reasons is because the folks that are farming around here are farming alfalfa, and you need big equipment to harvest and bale and take care, put your alfalfa up. So, if you wanted to farm underneath these solar panels, it'd have to be on stilts, 30 or 40 feet high, which I'm sure there's complications associated with that, but it's just not feasible for the type of farming that's done in our county. And then as far as grazing goes, we looked into this because there was some contention with a project years back about cutting off like winter range for mule deer and elk. And we were trying to figure out if there was a solution that would allow those elk and deer to winter in that area and still like consume the, forbs and grasses and so on and so forth. But ultimately what we found out was that electrical code prohibits that for some reason. You have to have fences around these utility scale projects, and putting livestock or even, wild game in there apparently is not allowed. So it's kind of been a hurdle. I think the premise of dual use is great. I think that there's just some more critical thinking, and real world examples that we need to learn from before it catches on a broader scale.
And I'll just add too, you mentioned in Eastern Washington that they were going through the state. That's allowable in Oregon too. The majority of the developers have learned it's better to go through the county and be a community member and get acceptance than go the other route. But that is also allowed, and that's what got Lou Marmot in a little bit of trouble. They first tried to go through the state, and they got a lot of opposition by doing that.
The community felt like they were just moving right around them and not taking, again, their values into account, and they got around the county process by actually planning this project out. So it was qualified as one project, but it was in like 5 different sites in various parts of the county. It was very strange. But for whatever reason, that allowed them to circumvent the county land use process and go to the state. So when they were receiving pushback for this plan, they said, okay, we will listen to the community. We will aggregate this project at one location. And then they had to secure a different type of power purchase agreement and go through a different land use process. So then they went back to having to go through the county, but they had already kind of, again, not built the strongest relationship with the community or the county. So it kind of played out in a weird way. And I don't think that's that's not very common.
Thank you both. And thank you, Sue. Great question. All right. I see one of our superstar Oregon volunteers and Alliance co-chairs in Elise Keith with her hand up. Elise, you know what to do.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciated in the video the opportunity to explore some of the urban-rural ways of coming together or seeing different sides of that perspective. And my question is, as you have done this outreach work with the video, you talked about some of the ways in which you've been able to connect with urban people and help them bust some assumptions about, land management being good for the ecology. What are some other assumptions that urban people make about people in your communities that you would love to bust? And what are some things you've learned about urban people that surprised you?
The biggest one for me, or the one I guess that I feel the most on a regular basis, is this maybe misconception that rural communities and rural folks don't care about the health of the landscape. And to me, I've never fully understood that, because I feel like in rural communities, oftentimes the majority of these populations' livelihoods are dependent on the health of these ecosystems. So they're the ones that are incentivized to promote healthy landscapes when your whole livelihood depends on it. So that's one that I continue to talk about, and, talk about like regenerative grazing and farming practices, no-till, carbon sequestration, soil enrichment. These are things that have been going on, at least in this county and in Eastern Oregon, for a long, long time, because folks saw that it was good. It offered economic benefit and it offered ecological benefit. So that's something that's been going on for a long time. And I guess one of the assumptions that's been busted for me about, urban communities is just that they are unwilling to listen. And I don't think that's the case. I think more often than not, it's just flat out that urban folks may not necessarily know how to even bring in rural voices to have their voices heard. You know, it seems like oftentimes urban communities are really interested in what we have to say and interested in learning, but they're like, we had no idea that you even existed in our state. Like, you know, where did you come from? So I guess that's one of the things that I've been surprised to learn.
Well, thank you all for your great questions. We're going to have a couple of breakouts now. So Ed and Len, hopefully you can, when we come back after the breakouts, ask some questions. And in the chat, our health person, Janet, is going to put the questions and I'll read them. So we want to let you go into breakouts for a few minutes, for about 10 minutes. Ponder these questions among yourselves and then come back and do a brief group share. So the questions are going to be in the chat. Whether you live in a rural or urban area, how do you perceive rural perspectives on the changing climate prior to seeing the film? And then after the film, has your perspective changed? And then the second question is, how have you responded to environmental changes in your area? How else has your community changed over time? And how has it adapted? So, you know, we have limited time. So when you go into your breakouts, you can pick one of them or both of them to discuss depending on your time. And there may be like 4 to 6 people in your breakout. So if it's easier to just have the person whose first name starts with the letter closest to A go first, just so that you can jump in and do your discussions. So Janet, are we ready to put people in breakouts?
Just 1 second, moving a few people left, so I'm just kind of adjusting the numbers real quick. So we don't.
And those chats will follow you into the breakout. So if you forget the question, you can look in the chat when you're in your breakout.
Okay, we have a few rooms that have dropped to about 3, but that will be a lot of good conversation.
Have fun.
I don't want to take too much time, so. Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Do you want to put, Janet, a quick broadcast in? Why don't we say, you want to say 8 minutes? Or
Oh.
Donna, what do you think? Because
Okay.
That's a good idea.
And warn them at about 7 minutes.
Yeah. So I would say give them the breakouts will be 8 minutes and we'll give you a 1 minute warning.
Okay, I will do that.
Looks like Sue didn't get put in a room. Is that on purpose?
Let me see. I'll move her to here. What happened is right as you were saying, okay, we're going into breakout, people were dropping like flies. And so the numbers of the breakout rooms were just really adjusting. I've never seen it quite like that before. So, but anyway, okay.
James is back.
Yeah, James Judd is back.
Oh, now he's gone. So.
Yeah, so you'll send the broadcast, right?
I'm doing that right now.
Thank you.
Did Donna get disconnected or did she go into a breakout room?
I didn't put her in a breakout room. She may have moved herself. She did. She's she's in room 4, so I don't know if she opted.
Maybe she wants to check one out and see what they're doing.
She may have, because I did not have her going into one.
Okay. Nick and Jim, how you feeling about it?
Oh, I guess I was curious to ask you guys the same thing.
Other than some bumps on our side, I think it's gone very well. There's been great questions. You both provided really interesting answers. And so, yeah, I think it's going well.
Good. I hope it's beneficial. I will say, I think out of all the screenings and panels that we've done, this has the most like diverse audience. It seems like there's folks in this audience from a lot of different perspectives, which is interesting because you can see when somebody asks a question, other people's faces in the, you can see their faces change a little bit. They're like, oh, so yeah.
We got the ground rules.
Yeah, no, but you guys are doing wonderfully. You're rolling with the punches. And I mean, it's hard not knowing what you're going to be asked, right?
We've got a lot of questions.
Yeah.
How about you, Jim? How you feeling about it? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I forget. Technology to me is always a challenge. So I'm feeling good about the questions and stuff. I just chuckling to myself, and that we talk about what's happening today in the world and how do we get over those things. I remember when I was in graduating high school, and all the hippies, and my parents was going, what the hell's going wrong with this world? And now I'm becoming my parent, I guess. I don't know, because I think it's all good. And we're always going to have difference of opinions and stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
Well, I really like that. I think they were talking about Bob Inglis, right, Jim, earlier, the Republican guy. I really like that Republican podcast that they did on you all. It was so funny because somebody had just told me about Republican, and I had listened to it. And then the next thing I knew, I had just subscribed, your thing popped up, and I was like, oh, the other side of the hill, I know about that. So that was really cool to hear that.
It taught me a lot because I hadn't thought about the oil and gas industry getting subsidies. I just hadn't researched that side. It's got me to do more research on it, Yeah. But I like that type of exchange, and particularly from different political views too. Republican, Democrat, whatever, liberal, conservative.
I mean, have you had some conservatives or Republicans in your town, like just question why, like have they been, like, why are you working on the climate change? And has there been any pushback from?
I've had a few that have said, I don't believe in it. They haven't questioned why I'm working on it or why LCR is working on renewables. I had one ranching friend, and I'm from a ranching community too. I had one ranching friend say, why are you limiting me? If I want to sell my land to a solar developer unirrigated, it's my damn land. Why are you doing that to me? That's the conservative side of the thing, of the equation. And so me and her talked that out, not that I convinced her. I'm pretty sure I didn't. I know her too well, but we had our conversation,
I don't know. And I think so I guess for context, Lake County is politically the most conservative county in Oregon. We have the highest percentage proportion of registered Republican voters and so on and so forth. Folks in this community are incredibly open to talking about a changing climate, as long as you don't start diving into why it's happening. But I think almost, everybody in this community agrees that the climate is changing around here. For what reason, that's a different discussion, but action needs to be taken to address and to adapt to this changing climate. And it's like the same conversation with renewable energy. It may have had biases against it from more right-wing folks in the past, but when you highlight those economic benefits and how it can support rural communities and rural business owners, lots of folks speak the language of dollars and cents. So that's a good way of getting through to folks too.
Sue.
Are we trying to get Sue Lonnie back into a room? Or good to see you, Sue Lonnie.
Itching to get out of that breakout room?
No, I lost the signal, and then I just got back. I was driving home and I lost it through a couple of bad spots. Now I'm home and I got a good Wi-Fi. So
gotcha. Do you want to be dropped back in, Janet can pop you back into the room.
Wherever I need to be.
Do you remember what room you were in, as I was wondering?
Well, but we have 1 minute left, right?
Yeah, I never connected with my room, so why don't you just leave me here and
Okay, because I just did send the message that
Oh,
it was
1
a
minute.
minute.
Gotcha.
So-
Boy, that
Yeah.
was fast.
So Lonnie and I did walk a mile in my news together.
Oh, did you?
So that was pretty cool. Yeah. That's a program, Jim and Nick, where, you know about it, Jeff?
Yeah, I heard
and
about it.
Janet, yeah, where you talk to somebody who's, you know, on the opposite political side about what news they read, and you read each other's news, and it's very good. So it's a Braver Angels program.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It's cool. I have not seen that. I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds very interesting.
So when
So
I
the
close it
one-
out in just a minute, they'll have 15 seconds. So just.
The one question I was going to bring up in our breakout room is that, you know, if you think about it, nobody ever shows what the wind turbines look like at night.
And I'm
And I was
closing the
kind of
room.
a fan that they look kind of pretty and peaceful until I saw them at night, and I find them very visually disturbing. And so that
Oh,
turned me to looking at all of the downsides.
are they spooky at night?
It's the all those red lights flashing in sync.
Oh, I see.
It's just a little, it's a little weird.
Here comes everybody back.
Awesome. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Jeff, do you want me to get people started, or
Yeah,
do
please.
you? Okay, great. So I hope that was fun and you had enough time.
No.
Oh, I know.
If you could tell us how much time we have next time, we'll try to do better. Thank
Yeah,
you,
we
Beth.
tried to send out a broadcast message. I saw that
Oh.
message in the chat about the time just as everybody went off. So yeah, we'll be clearer next time. But in any case, hopefully you had a little bit of time to chat. And what we want to do now, just for a few minutes, is to do a little bit of a share where people can raise their hands just like they did earlier. But now, instead of addressing the questions to Jim and Nick, we're kind of addressing them to each other. So what we're looking for is just some really brief comments on what you learned from each other in your breakouts, or what you shared in your breakouts in response to those two questions in the chat. And again, just brief answers so that we can get as many people to share as possible. So we'll start with Margie. You can unmute.
Thanks. I'll be quick. This question really is for Nick. It was something that occurred to me during the presentation before the chat, and we only got to the first question. And that is there talk about finding another crop other than alfalfa? I think you mentioned that was the main agricultural crop in that area. And my understanding is that's a very high water usage crop. So more questions.
Yeah. So as I understand it, farmers in our area are always looking for opportunities to make more money with whatever crop they're producing. When it comes to things like dual use, it seems like the biggest opportunities are like with like ground crops, you know, like things like strawberries, for example, would be like a great one. And I'm not sure that the climate is great for that over in Eastern Oregon. I think the climate is also kind of a barrier to exploring growing crops beyond alfalfa, or like up in the gorge, dryland wheat and things like that. You know, I guess don't know enough about it to say like why you don't see more diversity in crops grown in Eastern Oregon, but I'd venture to guess it's because of the climate and the availability of water.
Got it. Thank you. Glenn, you're up next.
Well, from our discussion, one of our members is studying for her PhD in this area, and from, I think it's Sue Lani Madsen from Eastern Washington. It seems I'm getting some idea how these projects are accomplished best on a more local level rather than a state level. You know, I guess in Washington, the state government put the kibosh on local government. And in Oregon, the state government is getting nowhere, and this local project has succeeded. Wondering what you think of that idea. That doesn't sound like a question, but.
Oh, and I don't know Eastern Washington's rules and the state rules. I assume the size of project determines if you can apply for an exception and go through the state process in the state of Oregon, if I understand it right. And it's based on size, but you can also go local. And that's a decision that I believe the developer makes based on the size of the project. And most of them in Lake County have chosen to go local because they know how important the community buy-in is and to be a community member. Well, we've got one developer that's developed several solars here, and I won't mention names, but we're trying to get a community solar for the school and the hospitals. And he says, I'll front $1.5 million to build it. You know, that's the type of community partners some of them want to be, you know, and I think they choose, they know they get more acceptance if they work with the community and help the community. And one of our solar projects, we send all the data into the school with a curriculum that they use from the solar farm. You know, that's another community advantage. So I think most of the developers in Oregon see that. This one happened to be outside of Oregon and outside of the country. Actually, the owner is, you know, in the subsidiary, and just didn't catch that.
Some of you are asking questions of Jim and Nick, and that's okay because there's so many great questions. So if you'd like to respond to the questions from your breakouts, or you'd like to ask a question of Jim and Nick, we're good with either at this point. Why don't we ask Len?
Len just went.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I lost track. Christine, you're next.
Well, this isn't a question, it's a comment. So
Please.
in the group, of which there were 4 of us, and one person never got to say anything, but I was embarrassed thinking, oh boy, I was like so prejudiced. I was way misjudging a lot, like, oh, probably there's hardly anybody in Eastern Oregon that gets it about climate change, et cetera. And the first person who spoke basically said the same type of thing, and so did the second, so did I. And so I thought, hey, at least I wasn't alone in my prejudice, but I really, really appreciate this film. It's really helpful.
Thank you, Christine.
Absolutely. Roger, you're next.
Hi. A question that came up in my breakout was how many permanent jobs are being created? My understanding is that you do have the benefit of tax money coming in on an ongoing basis. And I know that there's a certain amount of maintenance that needs to be done, cleaning the panels and just fixing the things that go wrong. But how, and sort of like in the scale of the county, you said that the total population was some number of thousands of people. How many people are actually getting permanent employment through this?
I don't know exactly how many permanent employees are being, permanent positions are being created for every project. I think it kind of depends on the size of the project, but it seems like the kind of standard for permanent jobs is around 2 to 3. But I think there's another way to think about this as well. A community like Lakeview, there is not a high availability to family wage jobs. And solar installation work is a pretty technical, I guess, trained skill, if you will. And I think that there is value just in the fact that, we've really worked with developers in the past that focus on utilizing local labor, and just having that much more of a trained workforce has value in itself, especially again with, policy changes. And we're kind of just at the beginning of a boom in renewable energy development in Eastern Oregon. It offers opportunities for people to be more employable. And it creates a better skilled workforce locally. And, it'd be great to have more long-term jobs. But, as a rural community who is not, we're not in the greatest place to negotiate. We'll take what we can get, and any opportunity is good.
And I'd like to also add that I don't remember the exact amount, but the majority of the developers have used locals to put in the projects, and it's been in the 70% local hire that they've done that. And then our biomass resulted in Red Rock Biofuels, which is taking wood waste and making jet fuel and diesel out of it. And that's going to be, if I remember right, around 85 jobs when it's developed. So locally, solar, once maintenance on, that's not many jobs associated with that. But some of the other renewables have more jobs associated.
Any other, oh, I see another hand. Caitlin, please come unmute and speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that discussion because I think that, you know, both Nick and Jim make really good points that not just jobs, but I think also thinking about communities coming together to solve problems for themselves and the people that live there is really empowering, and the groundwork is set and sort of connections are made that then when other problems arise, there's like networks that have already been established where people can then respond to, you know, other issues that arise in communities. And I think that's really critical to think about too in things like this and projects like this where people are coming together to solve local problems locally.
Definitely. Anybody else want to comment? Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Roy, go for it.
Hey, yeah, I was wondering if this is, so I love this video. I wish more people would see it. And for me, this is the crux of our political divide. It's rural, urban, and rural has a very legitimate beef. You know, as you said well in the film, like 50 years of a decrease in everything, agriculture, ranching, mining, timber, you name it, like it's all been trending down. And we convinced everyone that they need to go to college, so they go to college and they go to the city, right? So we have ghost towns. I mean, as you also showed in the film, we've got a lot of towns that had thousands that now have hundreds. What I like about what you're doing is, I'm wondering how contagious it can be to other rural communities. So in the past, rural was competing with rural. It was my corn versus your corn in one huge commodities market. That's not the case with sunlight and wind and right. I'm just wondering, are there associations of communities like this such that you can replicate what you've done and get it out to a larger audience? Versus the past, you wouldn't do it because you're competing with the guy in the next state who has cattle or has corn or whatever. Does that make sense? I didn't say that well.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And the short answer to that is yes. You know, opportunities that we've had to talk about this with other rural communities in Eastern Oregon have been great, and we're more than happy to share, you know, about our lessons learned because we want to see thriving rural communities in Oregon. And I think, you know, an even greater opportunity is to continue building those urban-rural divides because there's such complementary efforts. You know, you got to be, you know, friends with your, you know, urban counterpart or whatever, but, you know, from an economic and ecosystem health and climate change mitigation standpoint, there's so many opportunities to utilize the resources that rural communities have access to in urban areas. And there's a big opportunity to get some of those urban dollars flowing into rural communities to support, you know, rural economies as well. So yeah, I think you see a coming together of rural communities, but I think, you know, something that's even more exciting to me is that urban rural opportunity.
So Donna, it is 15 after the hour, so I believe it's time to wrap it up.
Okay, you could do one more question.
You
How
think
about?
we can? Oh, that would be great. I think, let me see. I think Roger and Caitlin have already spoken. I guess, Sulani, you have the last question.
Oh, okay. I have the impression from comments that I'm listening to that there are more people who have spoken who are surprised that this was accepted in a rural county. And I live in the reddest county in eastern Washington. And no one would ever question that you don't have the right to do what you want with your own property. Private property rights are big, and the money is big. But you know, I've got friends who they're getting big wads of cash waved in front of them about how this is going to be so much money that they can make off of their land, and they are concerned about. They're concerned about what it does to the ecology and to the health of the landscape and to the health of the soil, but the money is really, really tempting, and it's not about not wanting to keep the landscape healthy. It's about thinking about the landscape on a larger scale. At the same time that you have to adapt to climate. Farmers have always had to adapt to climate, regardless of what's driving it. So I guess my question is, I had one discomfort with the movie, and I'm hoping that maybe that could be expressed if it was distributed by Braver Angels, is that it doesn't really address at all any objections. It's all sunshine and roses, and I know that the conversations don't go that way. So while it does a great job of presenting the positive side, it doesn't really show the full picture, and I wish that it did. And I don't know if there's a way to address that in a presentation of the film that would help put that into perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate you saying that. The director and the producers of the film expressed the difficulty that they had paring down the footage that they took into 30 minutes. They said that went real quick. And ultimately, the film offers an opportunity. It's a platform to have further discussions. And that's something that we try to discuss with every group that we speak to. The film is not the whole picture, and you're exactly right in that. There are other issues, but the film is a starting point to have those conversations and create space for those, and yeah, essentially be a flat platform to dive into some of those more contentious issues around this stuff.
That's very well said, Nick. There's so much more we could talk about in resource and rural and urban divide, such as cross-laminated timber, how we could replace 14-story buildings that are concrete and steel, which are large carbon emitters, and we could replace it with carbon sequestering material. There's a lot, and issues are not all rosy as all on the good side either. There's bad side on anything. So those discussions would be good to have. But in a 30-minute film, the producers didn't think that was possible, I guess. That was their choice.
Donna, do you want to close us out tonight?
Happy to do so. I'm thrilled that Nick Johnson and Jim Walls from the Lake County Resource Initiative were here with us tonight, and we benefited so much from you being here, from your presence. So thank you so much for being here. And also thank you to our two facilitators tonight, Beth Mello and Jeff Spitzer. You did a great job, as I knew you would. And lastly, to Janet Sedgley, our super duper Zoom event manager, who expertly put you into breakout rooms and handled the technical aspects. So thank you to Janet. Regarding the Braver Angels Film Club, we're going to take a break for the month of December. We know you have lots of other things to be doing in December and holiday season. And then in January, we're going to come back with a discussion of the film 12 Angry Men, a 1957 classic starring Henry Fonda. It's a film about the character of a person, and we like to talk about character sometimes, as we have in the past, most recently with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And if you've not seen that classic yet, I sure hope you do. Anyway, and so until January, thank you again, everyone, for participating, and I wish you a pleasant good evening. Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.